Call the City of Apache Junction work session to order. Roll call.
Mayor Surtee,
Here.
Vice Mayor Wilson,
Here.
Councilmember Barker. Here. Councilmember Evans. Here. Councilmember Rizzi.
Present.
Councilmember Schroeder.
Here.
Councilmember Struble.
Here.
You have a quorum, Your Honor.
Presentation by and discussion with Zach Sakas of Sherman and Howard regarding the auction.
I'll do a quick introduction, Your Honor. Zach Sakas is our CFD attorney. As you see in the title of the agenda item, he's with Sherman and Howard. He is well-known and respected in his field of work with community facilities districts. So when you hear us refer to CFDs, that's what we're referring to. You, as a city councilor, are familiar with the two CFDs, the sewer district and the water district. And Zach is going to give us a high-level overview of CFDs and how they will be used with the growth to the south in the state land auction. So, Zach, take it away. I'll pull up your presentation now.
Thanks, Matt. Mayor, Council, good evening. My name's Zach Sakas. I am a bond attorney. I represent cities, towns, when they sell debt to pay for infrastructure. A large portion of my practice does involve community facilities districts, which is our topic tonight. A few Wednesdays ago, I was pretty excited about what was going on with the state land auction, so I dialed into the auction and listened in, and it was tremendous to hear the interest, and as the number kept climbing, and I think there's some exciting things coming to Apache Junction, and excited to be here and help be part of that process as it starts. Tonight, what we're going to cover is, with the type of land that was auctioned, we're not talking about widening one street or connecting to an existing sewer main to make this development happen. And so we're going to talk about development paying for itself with a financing tool authorized by statute called community facilities districts. We're going to talk about what is a CFD, what type of infrastructure does CFDs finance, how is the CFD governed, and then we're going to transition finally into sort of what are the next steps that the city will take toward potentially considering an application for formation of one or more CFDs. Pursuant to Arizona law, this is a long copy-paste from the statute. The key part is the underlined. The CFD is a separate political subdivision. It is separate and apart from the surrounding municipality or county which approved and authorized formation of the district. This means that it is a separate political subdivision. Sometimes I say it's a city within a city. It has the power to tax. It has the power to lien or assess land for repayment. It has the power to foreclose in the event somebody does not repay an assessment lien on their land. And it has the power to issue debt and repay that debt over time. Although city staff may function as CFD staff, the CFD is not a component unit or a department or division of the city. It is a separate political subdivision under law. CFDs have a variety of items that they're able to finance, including highways, streets, parks, water systems, flood control, lighting, civic buildings, no stadiums. So there's a variety of tools available, and I've been fortunate to help CFDs from small commercial districts financing a parking garage all the way out to an Eastmark type project where it's a large, long-term, lots of infrastructure going in. CFDs, the tool that's available, and again, what we're talking about is gross paying for itself. So the CFD has a few tools available to it to issue debt, acquire infrastructure, and then repay that debt over time. And so the first one is general obligation bonds. The next one is special assessment revenue bonds. Revenue bonds, and revenue can mean any type of enterprise revenue. So that could be a utility system, which Apache Junction is familiar with, or it could be a different type of enterprise. For example, as mentioned before, a parking garage might be its own enterprise, and fees and charges from somebody parking in the garage generates revenues to pay debt service on the bonds. Likewise, the CFD has the ability to levy a property tax for its operation and maintenance expenses along the way. So what is the CFD financing? We listed the types of infrastructure that it's eligible to finance, but what are we really financing? Are we financing the local tiny streets that a developer would have to do no matter what if they were building any regular subdivision? That's not the appropriate tool for a CFD. CFDs are used for large, I wouldn't call it totally regional, but larger infrastructure of a semi or more regional nature. So, for example, large arterials, other types of significant infrastructure that, especially on a project like what we're talking about that was auctioned by the state land, I mean, that will really be a gateway to that entire, the rest of the Superstition Vistas area. I've heard some estimates that, you know, and I'm sure this was exaggeration, but, you know, it's $70 million before the first toilet can be flushed out there. And so the types of traditional financing, whether it was bank financing, whether it was large home builders partnering entering into long-term joint development agreements, following the Great Recession in 2008, I saw banks leave that market, and I saw home builders as they were less willing to enter into the long-term joint development agreements where they agree on infrastructure splits. And so the financing tool that's been available to encourage development and have development pay for itself and to encourage economic development within a variety of Arizona communities has been community facilities districts. One of the things that we'll talk about when we get towards the end here with the city's community facilities district policy guidelines and application procedures is how is the city going to set the rules of the road for how the community facilities district will function. So one thing that we talk about when we're talking about CFD financing is construction financing or acquisition financing. And so construction financing would be where the CFD is selling bonds up front and then building the project. That can potentially put risk onto the community facilities district if a developer abandons development and a project is left incomplete. So one of the things that we've included in working with staff in the city's policies is a preference, strong preference, for acquisition financing. Developer comes out of pocket, constructs all infrastructure, and then is reimbursed later by the CFD issuing bonds and then dispersing proceeds of the bonds to reimburse the developer for the infrastructure that is already complete and often has already been accepted by the city. One of the other things that we unfortunately learned coming out of 2008 was for a large project, there are cycles, right? And there will be times when development slows down or stalls. So one of the things that we focus on as well on projects like this is when was construction completed? There were several situations in the West Valley of the Phoenix area where we had roads that were built in 2007, but the assessed valuation within the community facilities district, which is the taxing base that we use when looking at bond sales, stayed low for a long time and then finally came back 2018 or so. And so now that CFD was obligated to purchase 10-year-old streets at retail price, right, at full construction price. And that's something we don't want to find ourselves in. Obviously, a road that's not driven on, cracks, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So one of the things that we've started to work into our development agreements, which would be part of forming a CFD with the developer, would be to include a timeline or a restriction on how old the infrastructure can be or this placed in service date and when it can be still reimbursed. Again, the CFD financing options, general obligation bonds, this is your strongest credit of the community facilities district. Repaid with secondary property taxes levied on all taxable property within the district. And again, for the general obligation bonds, we're waiting for development to advance. We're waiting for assessed valuation within the district to increase sufficient to be able to appropriately qualify the district for issuing bonds and have a strong enough tax base where we can foresee, repaying debt service from tax revenues consistently. So that comes a little bit towards the middle or later. They grow over time. A lot of times you'll do a smaller issue up front, smaller issue of bonds, and then it grows over time as the assessed valuation increases. The other type of financing is special assessment revenue bonds. And so in that case, a specific parcel of land, often individual residential lots, is assessed at a fixed amount to pay for infrastructure. And in that case, you're looking at potentially being able to finance things earlier in the process because you're not waiting for assessed valuation to increase. You're looking at an appraised value of a particular lot. And so developers like a combination of assessment bonds and general obligation bonds because it provides a vehicle where there can be some financing up front and then transition into the larger general obligation bond issues as development improves, assessed valuation increases, and economic development occurs. There's in addition revenue bonds. Usually on this part of the slide, I say these are seldom used in Arizona, but I'm in Apache Junction, and you're familiar with the Superstition Mountain CFD, so I don't get to use that usual and move right on. The revenue bonds are another available, as mentioned previously. It could be a utility system revenue pledge, or it could be some other type of enterprise revenue. And I think in the case of this, the state land auction, we'll need to see the structure or potential infrastructure that they're looking to do, and if that's a component of it. How is the CFD governed? The CFD is governed by the mayor and council acting ex officio, plus 2 additional board members that are designated by the largest private landowner within the proposed district and appointed by the governing body. That's option 1. Option 2 is a 5-member fully appointed board. I strongly advise all my clients, and I've included in the draft policy upon consultation with staff, to opt for option 1, which is mayor and council acting ex officio plus the 2 appointed board members. It makes it easier. There's efficiencies. You know what's going on in the city. You're aware of concerns, and often residents of the district, even if it doesn't say Apache Junction, are likely going to ask questions of city staff about the district and how it's working. The 2 additional board members, just in case that was added by a statutory amendment in 2017. So if you hadn't seen that on existing CFDs, it only applies to CFDs that are formed after 2017. So that's something new, or relatively new. And so that may be an additional requirement that you may not have seen, for example, with the existing CFDs the city's familiar with. Once the CFD is formed, operations include annual budget law compliance, assessment management, debt service payments, property tax collections, and so there's a variety of activities that staff of the CFD will complete to ensure that the CFD continues to grow, pay its debts on time, comply with open meetings laws, comply with Arizona budget law, as any other Arizona political subdivision would. So now, CFD formation. Step 1 is we're going to take a look at policy guidelines and application procedures. This provides council and staff a uniform position to present to potential applicants so that no applicant can say, I was treated differently than another applicant. It also tells them what the city expects within an application. The CFD statute is a little thin in this area for what's required in an application. And so the city's draft policy guidelines and application procedures include some additional information. A CFD is a really long-term relationship between the surrounding, the CFD and the surrounding political subdivision and the developer. Their staff is probably going to have 100% turnover over the 30 years while the project is built out. City staff will likely have, I can't say that because Brian's been here a long time, but city staff will likely have a lot of turnover. I have 4 little kids, so I'm going to work until I'm about 80 or 90, so I'll be here. But so the additional questions that we ask up front, right, show us not just financial wherewithal questions, but your plans for development standards, other things that give the city a much better baseline to assess potential applicants for projects that could qualify for CFD formation and financing. Now, an additional change in 2017 was previously an applicant could submit an application for a CFD formation, and the city could take the time it needed to review the application before conducting a public hearing. That switched. There's now a 60-day ticking clock as soon as an application is submitted. And so what we plan to do, and what I advise my municipal clients to do in this situation, is engage in informal discussions in advance. And I understand those, not necessarily with respect to CFD formation on a more detailed level, but those discussions would likely be appropriate now that we know who the winner is of the state land auction. After the hearing, the city council may or may not adopt a resolution to form the CFD. And then after the CFD is formed, usually what we like to do initially is conduct 2 elections while we have a concentrated landowner group. that owns the land within the CFD. So authorize general obligation bonds, which we discussed earlier, and then likewise authorize the operations and maintenance tax. It's easier to do those up front when you have a single owner, and that's an acreage-weighted election. Both of them are up front. Some of the things that I mentioned before, the CFD completed application will get a landowner petition. They'll describe the board composition. They'll present who the potential 2 appointed board members they would like to designate. They'll include a general plan for infrastructure that they plan to construct, and as we discussed, additional requirements in the city's policy guidelines. And with that, I appreciate that you didn't fall asleep. A lot of times the bond attorney gets up there, and
It's interesting, actually.
and happy to
So,
engage in any further discussion.
so this has a lot of influence from the landowner, correct? I mean, there it said the 100%. I mean, how much oversight is from the city on the outside?
So once the district is formed, if you have city staff functioning as CFD staff and city council functioning ex officio as the board +2, there would be a quorum of city council members on the CFD board, regardless of the 2 additional members. The 100% landowner petition, is that what you were referencing?
Yeah.
So what that enables is there are certain additional steps, thank you, requiring public notice, some hearings, a formation election, that if you have 100% of landowners all saying, we would like you, city, to please form this district on our land and encumber it with a CFD, we're willing to waive some of those additional steps that might otherwise be necessary if you had a diverse group of owners where some wanted it formed and some were unaware of the process.
I got one question. And you're talking about bonds and the taxation and everything of the potential, I'll say, the development in it. Who becomes ultimately responsible if, heaven forbid, we have a major downturn and we've already gone for a bond and now everything stops? Who then becomes responsible for paying that outstanding loan?
Great question. So the first part of that answer is taking us back to the very beginning. The CFD is a separate political subdivision. So the city has no financial obligation to step in and pay any debt that the CFD has issued. And then the second part of your question is, it depends what type of bond. If it's an assessment bond and development has stopped and the landowner, the developer, which owns the assessed lot, is no longer paying on the assessment, then the CFD could potentially foreclose on that land to make itself whole to pay debt service to investors. With respect to a general obligation bond, if there is a delinquent tax payment, then that is collected through the county treasurer's regular delinquent tax collection procedure and tax lien auction process.
I was zoning in and out during all that. It was so riveting. But
It's a gift and a curse. It's good.
you mentioned property taxes at one time. Is it possible, Joel and you, to have property taxes in one part of a city and not the other? And would our friends from the Goldwater Institute come in and try to shut that down?
Well, keep in mind, the CFD, so say you're a property owner down there, you just bought a new house. You just spent $500,000, and now you have a new house. And you notice that you're comparing with someone who lives up here. And you're comparing property tax statements, saying, what is this? Why is this so much higher? The answer is yes, you can, because it comes from a community facilities district that is set up. So the current property owners in AJ would not be burdened with that extra expense. It'd be the new property owners. And I believe you can do that.
And let me just clarify for the record, we don't know what the price of the homes are down there.
Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to say.
One said these all the homes are 500,000. We
I
don't know
hope
what
it
those will
is.
be. And
It was
that the idea of growth paying for itself, or what I love the term is intergenerational equity, that because this is a 30-year asset, roads, sewer, water, so the folks that will be the beneficiaries or underwriting this debt are the ones that are benefiting from the asset. So then, in terms of equity, the folks down there will be the ones paying for it. They'll be benefiting from that asset down there. And to me is a good one-to-one link on where the debt service should come from.
So we won't be allowed to go down there?
No, you'll be definitely allowed to go down there, but it won't be your debt,
If I,
Good question,
unless you own down there.
will they be paying impact fees also?
So the impact fee discussion will be dealt with. The answer is Zach talked about this in terms of the infrastructure that are the smaller roads, unless they'll either be dealt with through impact fees or through an economic development agreement. So yes.
Okay, so we currently have two different types of CFDs. We have one where the council is the board, and we have another where we have an appointed board. In both cases, the staff are not city staff. It seems to me, in listening to your presentation, et cetera, that we would be looking at hiring more staff in order to accomplish staff taking care of the CFD as well as what they're taking care of now. I mean, they've already kind of overburdened, so that just seems to me something to look at
It's certainly
for the
something we'll be
future.
looking at,
Yeah.
to look at.
And I may have misspoke there with respect to so the statute permits, obviously, city staff to serve as staff
Right.
for the CFD or to hire.
Or to hire new
So you can do
Or a combination.
a combination as we have with the water district.
yes. If I can, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No. Oh, I have a question, but go ahead.
Can I just add to Chip's question? The question was, and this came up in 2006, 2007, when we had a downtown development agreement, and the owner wanted to create a CFD for about $12 to $18 million for the roads. They were going to take Idaho Road, basically change that, move that over to Winchester, I believe, and then create something with where the hotel was. So to pay for that, they wanted to create a CFD. The developer wanted the city to basically agree that if there was a default on those loans, the city would pay for that by using its sales tax citywide. So Zach talked about, he talked about how that would affect in this case. That would never happen because it's going to be built into the CFD agreement. So I just wanted to make that clear, and Chip, probably you're going back to that issue because that was a big issue then. That's why that development agreement never got signed. That's why one council member got up and left the room, as I recall.
Okay, I was reading the draft document on page 9, 4.2, where it talks about the appropriate election of 30 cents to $100 of net asset limited property value. Who sets that? Is that something the CFD itself would set, that number, or was the council set that number? I don't.
Mayor, council, the 30-cent tax that you're referencing, that's the operation and maintenance tax that I mentioned in the presentation. So that doesn't pay debt service on bonds. That's used initially to pay for CFD operations, and over time, as the assessed valuation grows, it can be used for,
So then there's
street
a
tax.
second tax.
So there is
well.
tax for debt service,
Right.
and then a tax for CFD operations. And the rate is set, the proposed rate would be included in an application. The statute suggests a rate of 30 cents per $100 of net assessed limited property value.
That's a normal,
That's what every district that I've worked on
Okay.
charges that. Provided, however, if the electors of the district, they both have to approve the 30-cent rate, but they can also approve a higher rate if they want that. Now, mayor and council sitting as the potential board of the CFD, and mayor and council have the sole and absolute discretion on whether to approve formation of a CFD. If that caused concern, then it would be discussed with the applicant.
So then down the road, once everything gets going and everything and the assessed value goes up, does the board have the ability to lower the rate so that they're not collecting too much money, and then adjust it maybe if slight recession happens again or something like that, is that something that can be adjusted over the course of
Yep,
time?
you can go down, but you can't go above what the voters
Can't go
approved.
above, can't go above 30, but if you go back down to 25, you can raise it to 26 or something.
Yes.
Okay. Then, question for you. When the CFD is formed, does it have a land mass that it is formed for, or as the area continues to develop in the future, coming north towards the 60 and such, can the CFD that is formed over the next couple, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever it is, can they take over that additional land, or is there going to have to be another CFD for another development later down the road?
Mayor, Council, so amending the boundaries of a CFD requires an election of the landowners within a formed CFD. So if the CFD has recently been formed, you still have concentrated owners between the master developer and 2 or 3 home builders, that's a potential to amend those boundaries. If homes have been sold and you have 500, 1,000 new rooftops, each of them with 2 qualified electors, because it requires both approval of a weighted by acreage and qualified electors for the boundary amendment, which becomes fairly
cumbersome
and challenging.
So down the road, it would probably, when the development starts moving farther north, probably going to have another CFD at that point.
Right.
Okay. Then the second part of that one is, so the bonds, I'm assuming, are 25, 30-year bonds?
Yes.
That would be sold? And then that you can continue, or as it progresses through the years and more developments, there's more bonds can be sold? Or is it just the initial bonds that are going to be sold?
You sell bonds as assessed value. For example, for general obligation bonds, I have a district, Cadence Community Facilities District. The first issue was something in the several $100,000. By year 2, several $1 million.
Yeah.
So as assessed valuation increases, and then likewise, other districts that I've worked with, it depends. So when we saw the recession, right, assessed valuation decreased. And so there wasn't enough of a change where new bonds could be sold secured by property taxes because we had reached the property tax target rate that had been set by policy. And so there wasn't enough availability to sell bonds in those districts. But generally, once they get into the swing of things and assessed valuation is increasing, bonds can be sold on an annual or semi-annual basis to reimburse the developer for infrastructure.
And then down the road, if, because one of the things we're talking about, or is kind of maybe in the plan, is to the city to purchase the sewer district and bring it into the city. And that could happen later on down the road with this CFD also, once things are developed and in place and everything. And if financially it could be done, the city could purchase it, the CFD's debt and everything, and take it over?
The city will not, in the case of the type of land development district, more land-oriented development district that we're potentially looking at for the state land that was recently auctioned, the city won't need to.
Okay.
Because as a road is completed, for example, part of the checklist is the city accepting that infrastructure, and then those property taxes or assessments stay on the land within the CFD. And so there would not be a way for the city to buy the CFD.
So our citizens don't have to worry about somewhere down the line, 20, 30 years from now, having a city council try to purchase those and increase debt for just the city.
Correct.
All right. That's
I want to expand on something he said 6 months, but that's not reasonable, but.
Well, whatever time frame.
But this auction ended up being smaller than we initially thought. We thought it was going to be possibly 6,000 acres. It was only 2,800. If it's extremely successful, there could be a chain reaction. There could be another 3,000, another 3,000 pushing west, north. So we could have 3 or 4 CFDs, which is what he was meaning. Could it all be brought under one umbrella, or each time there's an auction, and it could be every few years from now on? So there could be a lot of these then.
The goal with CFDs is to potentially, when possible, encompass as much land as you can to avoid having to go back to the boundary amendment elections that I mentioned earlier. Notwithstanding that, if state land is rolling out land over time, then that, and we have different purchasers, right, for each
Yeah.
chunk.
Yeah, I mean, if you look all the way to Florence Junction, it could just keep being
Absolutely.
dominoes that way.
Yeah. But we'll enter into, for example, if an application is received, approved by City Council for formation, we enter into a CFD development agreement with that particular owner or developer. And that's between the city, the CFD, and the developer, where we set how financings will occur, when infrastructure will be transferred to the city, what sort of indemnification from the developer will be provided to the city and the CFD. And so to add land to that with a different owner isn't feasible. We're going to set up a new, most likely, if it progresses as you mentioned, there would be most likely a separate CFD, separate agreement that applies to the next chunk of land that might be auctioned.
Thank you.
So we did provide, I apologize, Mayor, we did provide flexibility in the policy guidelines to review each application on a case-by-case basis, because the situation may change over time as additional land may be auctioned.
So part of what the CFD does, because they indemnify the city, is it through the engineering process so that we don't end up having like a Johnson Utilities problem and we have all these houses and not enough sewer? You know, so what's our safeguard in that?
Yeah, and so to be clear, the CFD does not indemnify the city. What we would look at in a development agreement would be with the master developer or landowner is that they provide certain indemnifications to the CFD staff and the city. The CFD is subject to the same rules as other Arizona political subdivisions with respect to the budget law and potentially not being able to indemnify other parties. So in that case, your question is what sort of safeguards? So one of the things we talked about at the beginning, right? Construction financing versus acquisition financing. So waiting for the developer to come out of pocket, take all the construction risk, complete a project. The city has both approved and accepted it, and all that occurs before the CFD issues bonds to reimburse the developer for that infrastructure. That's one example. The other thing that the city can do is, upon formation of a CFD, is put in place target tax rates where, okay, you can issue bonds that take you up to this level of a secondary property tax, but not higher than that. And that provides some flexibility where a CFD might not be over-levered too early in the process, right? You sell bonds right when your assessed valuation peaks in 2007, and then it goes down, and the tax rates have to go way up because you still owe the same amount of debt service. So even though the total levy is the same, the rate could go up in that situation. And so avoiding or doing what you can to avoid, none of us have a perfect crystal ball, but putting those sorts of safeguards in place too. We're not letting the developer dictate selling a lot of bonds early.
Okay.
We have to be smart, not go too fast. That's why we've worked so hard to prepare for, we're having this discussion with our current council member elects of 7,900 acre feet of water and only utilizing 2,000 now. So you have to keep that buffer going in terms of true wet water or true ability or capacity within the sewer system to not get too far out. What happened in Johnson Ranch is a little different. They started.
Yeah.
That's a question that comes up a lot.
It does, yeah. And that is something we're going to be trying our best and working with Al and Matthew of having communication plans several years ago with Frank Blanco. We brought some videos. We've got some videos in our hip pocket. We're going to do some more about where this is, the timeline of this, and water and true wet water and how that's managed.
So each one of these agreements, then, I mean, there's a lot of deposits being made. And so each one of these agreements, there's not a boilerplate for any of it. Each one would be a different type.
Right.
Basically the same, but the numbers would be different depending on the size, the acreage, the number of, okay.
Correct. The amount of infrastructure that particular developer plans to construct within that district, all those things are variables and would change for each district.
Okay.
Is that everything for today?
Thank you so much for having me. It was a
Thanks,
pleasure
Zach.
seeing
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Zach's our attorney, and he'll be representing us through this whole process, so we are the client. Just want to make sure everyone knows.
Presentation, discussion, and update on the Affordable Housing Assessment and Strategic Plan prepared by the Drachman Institute in 2010. Robin and Larry.
Hi, Robin's going to go first, and then I'm going to introduce Kendra, I think.
Okay, this all occurred because I had a constituent reach out and ask me what we had done since the Drachman Institute study, which was done in 2010. So I went back through the study and realized that we hadn't done a whole lot, mainly because the study itself was pretty cursory in its scope. It had a windshield survey of a very small area, and it looked more at housing condition than it did at affordability. So it really didn't cover that particular area. There was another study done then in 2018-19, which dealt mainly with mobile homes, but they did, I think, a better job of actually talking about affordability and what it means, et cetera. I believe it's really, really important for the city to continue discussing affordable housing. It's something that we're going to have to look at. We have beautiful developments in this city, but they are not, quote, affordable, end quote. For those people in the service industry, and we have a lot of people in the service industry. We have restaurants, we have retail, we have people that make minimum wage or just barely over, and they cannot afford the $500,000 house or even the $300,000 house. They need a more affordable situation. We need housing at all price points. In order to have a comprehensive housing strategy. The 2018-19 study included several suggestions, lifting zoning restrictions for low-income housing tax credit-funded projects, and I like this one better, waiving fees in exchange for the inclusion of affordable units within housing developments. I wanted to bring this up because I'm not going to be here next year, and I think this is a very important topic that I would hope that the council would continue to look at and work on, and that we don't just drop this, because I think if it's dropped now, we'll regret it. In 10 years, we'll be looking at people who simply don't have anywhere to live at all, who are working, who are part of our service folks. So go for it, Larry.
All right, thank you. I'm going to introduce Kendra Elner. She's an ASU student. She's in the graduate program at the School of Geographical Sciences and Environmental, the planning program. So we presented this at the Planning Commission a couple weeks ago. It was kind of a dry run. They asked some great questions. We included some of their information on that. So Kendra's going to go next. I'll be here, whoever, we can answer any questions at the end when we walk through it and how this relates to our general plan and some other things.
Thank you, Councilmember Barker and Larry. Good evening, council members and mayor. My name is Kendra Elner, and I'm a planning intern here, and I'm going to present to you the City of Apache Junction Affordable Housing Assessment and Strategic Plan 10 years later. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is just review the Drachman study and reflect on Apache Junction's affordable housing efforts in the decade and how it aligns with the current 2020 general plan. So a constituent found this Drachman study on the city's website, and the planning staff were suggested to present this evaluation from the study's recommendations to the commission and council, discussing about the city's achievements towards affordable housing within the decade since the study was conducted. So The Apache Junction Housing Assessment and Strategic Plan was funded by the Arizona Department of Housing, or ADOH, and it was conducted by the Drachman Institute, which is a planning and architecture organization housed by the University of Arizona. The Institute assessed the AJ's demographic and land use data to identify issues of its affordable housing. So the report format, their data was collected through physical, statistical, and existing reports that found evidence of AJ's varying affordable housing conditions. And from the findings, they explored suggestions for improving the affordable housing options through housing programs and community-based strategies. So through these data collection methods, the Institute's findings concluded that the Apache Junction's median income is lowest amongst Maricopa and Pinal counties. And notably, affordable housing does not only encompass low-income populations, because it is relative to any household's annual income, whether it's owner-occupied or renter-occupied. And it's usually best if housing costs are less than 30% of gross household incomes. And mobile homes make up a large percentage of AJ's housing stock, and there's also a small percentage of renters. So there's a high percentage of affordable housing units, creating an aging housing stock where 31% of the mobile homes were built before 1970 without adequate facilities. Additionally, AJ has no public transit options, making household transportation costs high because many people are employed outside the city. So between the lower incomes, the housing stock conditions, and the lack of public transit options, it impacts the housing choices and affordability. And these findings from the Drachman study recommended to the city to develop and explore housing and community-based strategies. So affordable housing can be defined by the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department, stating that housing is considered affordable if housing costs do not exceed 30% of household gross income. According to when the study was completed in 2010, their statistics were pulled from the American Community Survey 2008 data, stating that 42% of AJ households could not afford to own a single-family home. Additionally, 30% of AJ renter households had higher housing costs than 30% or more of their income. So, starting by examining the existing reports from the Drachman study for AJ, support a historical context of how affordable housing is impacted by the lack of public transit, which has hindered affordable housing developers from obtaining low-income housing tax credits through the Arizona Department of Housing, such as AJ Townhomes and AJ Villas. And evidently, from the Pinal County feasibility study, shown at the left, indicated that the city has no regional transit plans and the closest stop is over 10 miles away. The most current Valley Metro Light Rail extension map that is shown in the middle depicts that there is currently no future proposed east expansion. In order to create density which supports the use of public transportation, Apache Junction created a downtown redevelopment and implementation strategy that is shown on the right to help the city focus on infill development and hoping to prepare for transit uses in the future. So people who live in affordable housing often do not have personal vehicles, and transit is one key component for benefiting these populations. It's been 10 years since this study was conducted, and we reviewed the accomplishments that Apache Junction has achieved after the recommendations were presented. The first recommendation for housing was to create a repair and replacement program for mobile homes. But the study did not recognize the city had already had a repair and rehabilitation program for manufactured home since 2005. Currently, the city uses federal dollars through ADOH to rehabilitate about 11 homes a year for both conventional and manufactured homes. There was never an implementation of a replacement program for mobile homes, but the funds did allow the repair program to provide forgivable loans to homeowners. and the city program does not allow rehabilitation on pre-HUD mobile homes, and therefore it was only utilized on homes 1977 or later. The Drachman's oversight led to an achievement outcome for the city to do a more detailed housing assessment with community volunteers, which was entered into a Microsoft Access database, creating a strong sustainable communities initiative with the assistance from the Economic Development Director to address a variety of issues in the city's neighborhoods. The Apache Trail redevelopment area was also created to enable the city for quality for federal CDBG or community development block grants to fund for infrastructure. The city housing assessment was updated in 2018-2019 with help from ASU interns who converted the data to GIS format. So this is the final product of the property condition survey in the internal city GIS map. And as you can see, they went around and, rated the properties by excellent to not verified and poor and all that. So in relation to the Strong Sustainable Communities Initiative created by the city, sparked discussions on redevelopment for other housing projects in 2017, where the city was able to receive CDBG funds from HUD and to acquire 2 vacant lots, one with an older mobile home to rehabilitate. Apache Junction partnered with Habitat for Humanity to build quality and affordable housing that included 3 homes on these 3 lots. The city's former program and resource manager is credited to coordinating most of these housing achievements. The Drachman's second recommendation for housing was to partner with the Arizona Community Action Association, or the Community Action Human Resource Agency, or CARA, to assist low-income residents in weatherization repairs, which provides funds for energy efficiency. The study also did not recognize our ongoing partnership with CARA, but because there is a waiting list for weatherization repairs, the city decided to include its own weatherization in its rehab program. The third recommendation for housing was to administer a homeowner workshop to assist and inform residents about how they can go about repairing or improving their housing conditions. Prior to 2007, the city did have classes on housing repairs, but it was discontinued. The city partnered with the United Way to create a financial stability class for residents in the community and began publishing a quarterly newsletter in 2007, which included homeowner maintenance guides on its website that is sent to residents as well. The last recommendation for improving affordable housing included expanding the supply of affordable housing rentals through incentives and inclusive zoning. Apache Junction was able to attract low-income housing tax credits to establish 2 affordable housing projects with the Apache Junction townhomes and AJ Villa developments, developing a total of 141 units total. This was a great accomplishment, but for communities like AJ, financial incentives such as waiving building permit fees, development impact fees, utilizing federal CDBG grants, home dollars are not readily feasible. So as for community accomplishments in the decade, the Drachman Institute suggested for Apache Junction to plan for incentives and develop partnerships for transit-oriented development. The city did receive a proposal for a transit route along Brown from Sossaman to Ironwood into the city around 2018-2019. The plan did not come to fruition because the city lacked financial means of about $250,000, and it was not able to take advantage of the Federal Transit Administration's funding for public transit prior to 2010, where through the Rural 5311 program, which would have had the federal government covering 90% of capital projects, 80% of administration costs, and 58% of operating assistance. It would have been extremely beneficial for establishing public transit, but Apache Junction is no longer under the rural designation for these projects, and the city has to go through MAG, which is that only covers a certain percentage of capital costs and no operating assistance, which is also not feasible for the city at this time. In June 2012, ADOT funded the Apache Junction Transit Feasibility Study update that provided additional recommendations and transit options for the city in the future that more than likely will take up to another decade or two to establish a better plan for public transit in the area. So the 2012 study noted that AJ is not ready for public transit, but it could use the Job Access Reverse Commute program as well as park and ride lots to improve or go towards that initiative. The second recommendation is to improve streets and increase connectivity for other transit modes. Apache Junction adopted an active transportation plan in 2018 that provides more complete streets for walking, biking, and horseback riding. So our last community recommendation was to encourage governmental participation and form neighborhood associations. Apache Junction established the Strong Sustainable Community Initiative and identified 4 to 5 neighborhoods where the city has invested in resources for community surveys, neighborhood cleanups, sidewalk improvements, drainage improvements, installation of neighborhood lighting, and more in order to bolster AJ's neighborhoods. Through the sustainability interns from ASU, community resources have been added to the website, such as the 14-step engagement process found on the city's website. There's also the Apache Junction Community Development Corporation Make a Difference Day that is held once a year where members of the community volunteer to clean up non-conforming properties and beautify other parts of the city. 3 weeks ago, or several weeks ago now, Make a Difference Day efforts included cleanup behind the Focal Point and Silly Mountain Park Botanical Walk, and last year, there were 3 residential lots that underwent a major landscaping improvements, including Apache Trail, Think Desert Walkway at Flatiron Park. Credits to the Park and Recreation Department, the Public Works Department, the CDC, and community volunteers, but there has been less luck in creating neighborhood associations in this strong, sustainable community neighborhoods. So the Apache Junction is continuously advancing affordable housing initiatives. So according to the 2020 general plan, there are 4 objectives to improve affordable housing, and they include creating policies regarding manufactured mobile home use and redevelopment, diversifying housing stock and incorporating a variety of housing types, and associated values to allow for diverse demographic of residents, to maintain and attract quality housing stock, condition, design, and construction standards, incorporate sustainable practices in all housing developments. So I hope this presentation has shown that the city has prioritized affordable housing efforts prior to the Drachman study. And though the Drachman does provide some supplemental data and recommendations, but it lacked some detailed housing quality assessment the city actually needed, and which would have been included in the quantitative affordable housing needs. The report is outdated but can be referenced for general understanding of where AJ stands in terms of socio-demographics and affordable housing conditions. Here is a summary of AJ's accomplishments denoted throughout this presentation. This includes the affordable housing goals incorporated in the 2020 general plan and previous studies completed by ASU Project City collaborations with graduate student Maggie Dello, the applied project of the mobile home parks, RV parks, and future affordable housing, and separate Project City studies of understanding homelessness and AJ. The most upcoming planning document that will need to be updated is the Apache Junction Trail Redevelopment Plan in 2021. So from this presentation, I hope this information showed that the city has put in a lot of work to improve the community. So what are the next steps the city should focus on? And if anyone has any interest in learning more about affordable housing, there is a webinar from GPEC about affordable housing.
Yes.
I have some questions. I have a few questions. The part about the bus was really interesting because we get that a lot. I think it gave the public a good explanation of where we're at with the bus system and why it's not just a matter of signing up and saying, okay, now we have a bus system. So thank you for including that part. Can you explain what the job access program is?
Yeah. I don't know exactly what that entailed.
And then there was a part on one of your slides, I'll just say this while you're looking for the answer or whatever, that showed the different parts of the city. Red was dilapidated, yellow was not too good a condition, green was excellent. I just wanted to snapshot that real quick if I could. Yeah, give me just a second. Thank you.
Well, this is available on the,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And we could email you this slide too if you want.
It's okay. I like to have it right
Just
here.
colorful, is that what you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hopefully there's more green on it than.
Yeah,
the
but that
dark
job
red.
access program, I just want to know if you had a little bit of information.
That, I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know. I think it was referenced in there.
Maybe we can
Double check. I
get
can
the
get
answer
back to you on
another
that,
time.
sure.
It may
And
have
then
been something originally exist in the Drachman report, so
Yeah.
we can look it up.
And then also, one of the things that you had talked about were the older model mobile homes that were pre-77. And so we may have issues where people want to fix them up, but don't really have, maybe they can't, I don't know what the code fees would be or this or that if they want to fix things up. So maybe that's something that we could look at is if there's an area or a park or whatever that does have a lot of those older models. I hate to say it, but it might be better to get rid of them, but I don't know how safe they would be. But if the city can work with them on those code issues, because if they're already having something that's that old, obviously they can't afford something newer. I don't know what it would take to, go in and fix the electric or plumbing or this or that and something that old. That may be something that's holding people back. Just a thought, I don't know.
Primarily, it's funding, I think. Again, when the city has adopted its housing rehab program, the priority was to fix up post, or not pre-HUD units, but the newer units.
Yeah.
And because the pre-HUDs are not built to any standard, they can be fixed up, they can do repair and things like that, but we would have to find different funding sources. I think I got to double check this because I got whether, like the Arizona Department of Housing, the way I first read it was we're not allowed to use federal money on pre-HUDs, and I got to double check that, yeah. So,
Are we doing something to get rid of those? 'Cause it just seems like they're not safe. Are they safe? I mean, how do you keep them up to?
well,
code?
generally, I mean, there are folks that we have a lot of older housing stock that are, and you drive around town and you see them, that are old recreational vehicles or mobile homes prior to 76, 50s, 60s that people have built additions onto. So I know the CDC just helped out a veteran who was, I think, 90 years old. I think their nephew owned the property. They came in and put a new roof on it. So there are those types of cases that we hear about and that we try to help people.
I guess what I'm more referencing is these mobile home parks that have several of these older models.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing with?
So, Larry, maybe talk a little bit about the issue study and the rezoning process and density and how we may be able to incentivize. And you mentioned that in the presentation as well.
So one of the studies that ASU studied was Maggie Dello, graduate student, talked about, we gave her a list of about 30 parks that most of them are older, non-conforming parks where the units are dilapidated. A lot of it in that report was really working with management to figure out how to upgrade the parks without displacing people, because that's the troublesome issue is we could go in there, do very strict code compliance, and all of a sudden we put a whole bunch of folks out on the street. So I think it's a gradual process of, improving their quality of life as renters in these parks, but at the same time not tolerating, just kind of continual accumulation of stuff. And they do change hands, and so We have worked with a lot of owners to try to clean up the parks that way, but in terms of the units themselves,
Yeah.
that's, again, a lot difficult. Again, even our program, we can't use our HUD dollars, we don't use them in rental parks. We really have to own your lot and your unit, and it has to be after 76 for us to use our federal dollars on.
I mean, some of the, I won't name any, but when you see some of those, that you just feel bad for the families that are struggling, that are having to live in some of those, because it just doesn't, they don't seem.
Yeah, some of the recommendations we were trying to maybe work in the zoning code is some, I guess, minimum standards of what you should have in a manufactured home or mobile home park. So there ought to be a place for the kids to play. There ought to maybe be a white picket fence out front and mailboxes and some landscaping, some minimal things that a property owner might want. We have a lot of these antiquated parks that seemingly they have a house on the property, and in the backyard they have 7 RVs, and it's basically a dirt lot, and whatever can fit there. And so again, those folks need a safe place to stay, some quality of life, and I think those are some things we're looking at in the zoning regulations to see if we can't essentially have some minimum standards for these parks that don't displace folks, but at the same time give them a better quality of life.
And one of the things that I found was a lot of people here, whenever their parent dies and their parent lived in the mobile home, the kids have no desire to do anything with it. A lot of times it becomes property of the park itself. There's no title transfer, it just becomes another rental. And unfortunately, if you want to upgrade and you can get the financing to get a newer mobile home on, it costs roughly $2,000 to take the old one to the dump. And there's no financing mechanism to do that. So all of a sudden, someone's hit with, well, $2,000 to get rid of it, I'll just give it to the park, and it just becomes that continuing cycle without any funding available to help out on it.
And there are some recent projects that use these low-income housing tax credits in Mesa, where they've gone in, articles have been in the paper, where folks get displaced because a developer comes in, buys out the mobile home park. Some of them were with these tax credits, so what they try to do is phase it such that they're actually relocating people into housing, newer housing along the light rail. And again, that's one thing that we struggle with to get these tax credits. I know that Apache Junction villas, they applied 3 times to get the tax credits. And so because we don't have transit, they lose 30 points right away. So they had to go to the statewide pool to get that project. Whereas other projects, the state housing has really said, if you have transit, so that way Yuma, Coolidge, these cities that have transit, they're more likely to get these low-income housing tax credits than we are. We just have to have developers that apply to that statewide pool until we have transit. This JARC is a program. So that 2012 study says the city should check out, investigate a job access reverse commute program. So it has an acronym. It is a thing. I'm not familiar with it. And then it just talks about park and ride lots to make sure folks have an easy way to commute if they're going to commute. So I can get you more information about what those types of programs are.
Okay.
Hey, Brian, years ago, the cities had the ability to use incentives to attract businesses into the communities, and then the state legislature took that away from us?
There's the program called tax increment financing.
Yeah.
That's the one that's gone now, that we used to have, that our community was one of 2 in the state.
And explain what that did.
It's a recognition by taxing entities like a city, a county, a fire district, and a school district to set aside a geographic area. In our case, our city council in the late to mid-90s set aside the downtown and that kind of leads to the next presentation, but set aside an area that was an emphasis of what we might consider redevelopment to freeze the tax levy at a certain rate, meaning that the current property tax owners would continue to pay what they pay, but that the new development that came in or any new incremental, that's that increment, tax increment financing, that new increment that came in, and in our case, it was the new Fry's Plaza, some of those new restaurants that came in. Those new taxes that came in would be set aside in a separate fund at the county that would then come into the city to be only invested in infrastructure in that geographic area. And 49 out of 50 states have it.
Yeah.
Why was it taken away?
That is a great question for Joel.
I think the mayor mentioned the Goldwater Institute earlier.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't Goldwater in that case.
Oh, I'm sorry, man.
That case, it started at the county level. Essentially, a county attorney talked to I believe it was the treasurer, and they started questioning. It was a new treasurer. They questioned the payment, and then at one point, after 10 years of getting the TIF, tax increment financing, they canceled it. They said, we're not going to be paying you anymore. So then we had to start negotiating with them. We did that. We were led on for about 2 years, and finally the city decided to sue them along with Casa Grande, because Casa Grande did also have a TIF district, 2 separate ones actually, a high school one and a hospital, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a way to do debt financing. Essentially, I think what happened here is had the city gone out and borrowed money for 20 years to do, North Apache Trail and Plaza Drive, to go out and borrow money. I think that was the nuance in the case, is that the city could have continued to have revenue come in if we had debt service to pay. So not unlike a CFD, but it's a specific geographic area. City goes out and borrows money, maybe, or ours was a pay-as-you-go. And had we not had a pay-as-you-go and we went out and borrowed 20, then I think we probably could have kept the payments, if that's my understanding.
Well,
And was it your question about our specific interest with the county, or was it the state legislature? Because the state legislature
Pulled the rug
was
out.
was the one that pulled the rug out.
At the
I don't
last,
know which
Well,
question you're asking.
at the last GPEC mayors and county commissioners or supervisors meeting, it was brought up that this should be one of the top priorities, is to try to get some legislators to bring it back.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are oblivious. The ones that have never been on a city government, they don't realize what it means. So if you do see your state legislators, ask them to champion that for us.
Larry?
But my reason for asking that if we could talk to our state legislators and show them the benefits of something like that to the local community, so that we could benefit our local citizens to help us develop some infrastructure to increase the availability of jobs and the infrastructure for businesses that could have some higher paying jobs to come in and build manufacturing, distribution, businesses and such things, so that we could increase the wages that our citizens are have the availability to earn. It would help to pay for housing in the future, correct?
Correct.
So along with this initiative that is important to us, but we also have to look at the other issue, which is more insidious in here, is that we have to make sure that we have good paying jobs, so that people, I'm going to say this, but so people can go out and earn a living, so that they can afford their housing, their transportation, and maintain some personal dignity, so that they've earned it themselves, instead of not consistently, falling upon the government to provide things that they can earn themselves. If we properly plan this and work with every legislator, both federal, state, county, to move our economy forward instead of staying in a stagnant place and making excuses as to why we need to governmentally assist with affordable housing.
I would like to respond to that. I don't think that this is necessarily governmental assistance. I think it's acknowledging the fact that we will always have people who are in specifically service industries, waitresses, cooks, etc., who are not going to earn the same wages as some other people. And they will need the types of housing that are affordable to them. And it's not a government handout. It's saying to developers, hey, let's include some more affordable units within your development. If we have to incentivize them some way, fine, let's find a way to do that. Or turning some of these parks that are what this particular, the 1819 study called sandbox parks. They studied 28 parks, 13 out of the 28 were sandbox parks, and they need to be raised. And even if we get to the point where we can figure out a way to redevelop those parks in such a way that the housing within them is affordable for those folks, I don't think that's a government handout. I think that is simply acknowledging our population and realizing that not everybody, no matter what job they have, can afford some of the housing that is going up around us. And I appreciate the report, and I appreciate bringing it out for the council to hear, and hopefully they will keep this in their minds, and as time goes on, request updates on how we're doing with affordable housing and try to come up with other ideas for it. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the questions I think the Plan Commission, which kind of relates back to this, is, well, how many affordable housing units do we need?
And
well, the
that's a
data
good
we're looking
question.
at is 2008 data, but you can back into a number. I know we're going to be talking, we mentioned the affordable housing thing that GPEC is doing. We're going to be talking about homelessness in a few minutes, that they're interrelated. Homelessness relates to the lack of affordable housing. So it's a big picture, or it's a big issue nationwide.
Yeah,
so.
and it's not...
It's a problem in every community,
It's not just
basically.
homeless people who can't afford housing.
Right.
Yeah.
We have kids that graduate from high school, and we want them to stay in Apache Junction. They can't stay in Apache Junction because they can't afford to rent an apartment here or buy a house here. We have young people who get married and have a kid, and they want a house. They can't get one here. That's the type of affordable housing that I think we need to look at. It's for all stages of life, not just one.
So
You had
that
a
we
comment?
don't-
Yeah,
so that we
I
don't
have a
people-
question. So this map has a date of October 2020 on it.
That's the date the map was prepared, but the data really was from the interns in 2018-19.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I see a lot of green and dark green, light green, yellow. When this was created, is there any way to come up with the percentage of the poor or dilapidated to this? Because that's one thing that a developer looking to come here is going to say, you know, how much of your housing stock is excellent or fair, and how much is dilapidated? Because Mesa has dilapidated, Chandler has, I mean, everybody has
it.
a percentage of dilapidated housing stock. And I just didn't know if there was any way from this map to calculate something like that.
You can, because it is parcel-based, but not to zoom in on any one particular parcel. We want to be careful of that.
No,
But we have whole, you know, this
whole.
is a whole neighborhood here that we've installed, you know, lights in and things like
Right.
that. So that's, you know, that's where we spent a lot of
Actually, it
CDBG money in this particular neighborhood, so.
It was north
Yeah,
of
we could
this.
have percentages, you know, gross, raw percentages, so.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right.
It's north of that.
It's up
across
here, yes,
Broadway,
you're right,
yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
just think
So we could
that's
have
an
percentages, we
important
could,
factor,
yeah, we could
because
get you that.
the entire state needs affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
Developers aren't building studio apartments anymore. That's what my first apartment was. We don't have that here. So young people do have to either go to another city that has more apartments, older apartments,
Or live at home.
or live with their partner.
So we could create a pie chart of this table, I think, and
Oh,
just,
oh,
get
that'd
it
be
back to you,
great.
yeah.
Love to see that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there are several things that have changed since the study as well, and one of them is the increase in the minimum wage. But if developers aren't building it, there's got to be a reason. Is it, I mean, it's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Are they not developing because they're not getting utilized like they used to, or? I
No,
mean, there's
because-
several different things that are factored in, but many things have changed since this study.
The cost of construction to build a 2,000 square foot house versus a 1,000 square foot house does not equate. The amount it takes to build the 2,000 square foot house, which increases their profit, is minimal. It's amazing how those numbers look, but up until recently, everybody wanted to own their own home. Now people would just be happy if they could afford a townhome. Even the one designer for Coyote Crossing, she's a designer for a developer, and she said she couldn't afford any of the houses there. And that's a statement. Here's a college-educated professional who can't afford to buy anything. So it's not, and all I'm trying to say is it's not unique
Very
to
complex
us.
issue.
It is.
It
The
is
discussion of
complex.
where all these issues are very complex. What I do notice about this map is very little, if folks think there's a lot of vacant land, there just isn't in
Not
Apache
much,
Junction. So
is there?
that's the idea of
This
what,
really
talking
shows
about
it,
tax
yeah.
increment financing or redevelopment is so important, and the discussion of density and rezoning. And I think some of the discussion we're having here helps us at staff be able to move forward with policies and ideas to help increase some of those goals. So when a developer comes in and they want to talk about redevelopment and look, here's some areas that you may want to look at, we'll provide you density to do an apartment complex if you want to, those types of things.
Right.
But just because it's an apartment complex doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be affordable either.
Oh,
Correct.
yeah,
And it's
like
like,
the
who's
guy
going to take the
So
loss?
that's-
Yeah, like the guy who came in, a couple of
Right.
weeks ago, that we
Then that
asked
gets
him how
into-
much they were gonna be, and he said they were luxury apartments.
I would argue that some of the issue is that in Apache Junction, we haven't had a big supply of housing come in. So, in terms of the supply side and the demand side of the curve.
And being that you said it, there's not a lot of land. There's, where do you go?
Right. And that's why it's so important, the state land discussion we just had is a big discussion.
Yeah, well, those aren't gonna be affordable, not going for that price.
Thank you. Yep, we just wanted to, follow up
Yeah.
on that.
So again, the
Thank you very
definition of
much.
affordable is 30% of income. So if you make 200,000, it's still 30% of your 200 or 30% of your 30,000, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it
Okay.
cuts across all income ranges.
Absolutely.
All right, it's hard to tell when an item like this is over, but I think this one's over.
Well, just so we keep it in mind, so the
Sure.
councils of the future keep this in mind and don't let it drop.
Okay, so Larry, stay up there. Presentation and discussion with city council on zoning parameters regarding B3, the city center. Robin and Larry again.
Okay, I brought this up because most of the people who ran for council seats, mayor, et cetera, here all said basically the same thing, that they wanted to retain a downtown that reflected the history, the culture, et cetera, of the city. So I looked at the downtown area, I looked at the zoning, and lo and behold, I discovered that there are some uses down there that I don't think reflect much of our history or our culture. And as it stands right now, a developer could come in and build a 5 to 6 story assisted living home, facility if they didn't want any planned development. They could build it right across the street from Flatiron Park. So I felt like it was very important that the council look at the uses, the zoning, and even the boundaries of the downtown. The downtown boundaries stop at Apache Trail. They don't go south of that. And most of us, I think of Los Gringos and those areas as part of the downtown, but they aren't included in that zoning area. So I don't know whether that's something that anybody wants to look at or not, but I did notice that. I just hope this is another issue that I hope that councils of the future will continue to look at and continue to monitor so that they do get what they want, and we don't have another guy come in with multi-storied apartment houses at the roundabout that were perfectly allowable by zoning. He didn't have a problem, but obviously the council planning and zoning and the populace had a problem with that. So let's change it. Let's not have it sit there like this. Go for it, Larry.
So I did want to we'll go from the general to the specific to get back to that point. So I kind of wanted to go through from the 30s, what downtown looked like, to today. I want to talk about some of these previous planning efforts that the city has undergone over the decades, and then what has happened because planning has occurred and the importance of planning, then talk specifically about the height and the permitted uses and things, and then kind of what's next. Where does the city, again, it was mentioned earlier, 49 other states have a way to make a downtown.
Right.
And so since we don't have this mechanism anymore, what can we do? What should we do? What should it look like? So that is what it looked like in 1937. So you had the sheep trail. Essentially, you had US 60, if that even was US 60 back in the day. Virtually no development, and Apache Trail appears as a wagon road. Then in 1953, you start seeing the start of the land pattern and some of probably the federal auctions or federal lands that came available. While you see this grid pattern, you see this old historic use here. There was a racetrack or something like that back there. The Grand Hotel gets built in here. Then you start seeing, a decade. So these photos are about a decade apart. And you start seeing the formation of the downtown, but in essence, really all you have is US 60. You have, I guess, what I would call, a bones of a city. Like you go to Florence, there's a downtown there. We have 40,000 people. They don't, but they have a downtown. Buckeye has a little bit of a town center that's, Gilbert has now a town center that came off of a core where this, in my opinion, this was part of the county, unincorporated, the county thought this was part of the county. Like they never dreamed back in the 37 to 70s, early 70s, that this was going to be a city, and county planning, I've worked for 2 counties. How county planning is done is totally different than putting on a city hat and being a city planner. I can tell you that from doing this for a while. So you had the AJ or the Bashes Plaza that showed up there. You have that 2 apartment buildings that we tore down are there, the Grand Hotel. You have the formation of these large-scale manufactured housing parks that are here already in the 70s. Then in 81, again, you see this. I think there's 400 units, manufactured housing. It starts setting really what is going to happen in the area. So Plaza Drive never really does kind of go through, but it does. The original City Hall complex is up in here. Modest commercial growth is going on. 1992, you see the county complex, you see the post office, you see what a lot of downtowns have. They have a grocery store, they have a post office, they have government offices. That's really what a downtown typically is. 2004, again, the Grand Hotel is closed. Fry Center is built, as Bryant mentioned earlier. County complex continues to grow. City Hall complex goes. I took out the feedback because now it's a medical office. So things evolve. Downtowns do evolve. 2010, Grand Hotel is gone. The recession came into this area. You see vast swaths of open space that have continued way back in time that end up being the Fry's shopping center that you see there. That in 2019 is Fry's, still large swaths of vacant land. This is the land that's BLM land that's leased to the county on the patent. Again, expansion of City Hall is there, county building, Social Security Administration, et cetera, builds out. But it's essentially a suburban feel. It's all one-story strip centers. It's not what most folks would consider to be a downtown. So over time, I wanted to go back and say, what were the sequence of plans? So I have a picture of this later, but in the late 90s, there was what I can find is something that seemed to be approved by the council was actually in the 90s. Between that and the DRIZ are really the only two formal documents the city's ever adopted that I can find that are downtown. So Visualize Downtown 2020 was done in the late 90s. Downtown Alive, I think I have some information about that. Superstition Square was really the development that Joel just talked about, which included realigning Idaho was part of that whole thing. The redevelopment plans, various redevelopment plans that the city has adopted for downtown. The DRIZ, of course, I'll talk about that. The staff here in 2011 did some conceptual plan kind of building off of the DRIZ. A couple of ASU studies, the most recent with Dr. Kim in 2016. We as staff have tried to come up with some kind of furtherance of that, and then we have a downtown element in the downtown element of the general plan. So this is the plan. The only thing that I can see that actually seemed to be formally endorsed or embraced, and what came out of that, you'll see the focal point. So late in the 90s, you see that actually got built because it was in a plan. The landscape median. So again, back to the idea why we do planning. If you don't have a plan, you really don't know where you're going. You don't have a blueprint. This one doesn't have the Flatiron Park in there, for example. This is kind of the ASU students later on did something to make this what this could be, I suppose.
It was an
Restaurant Row.
It was an amphitheater. Yeah.
Trailhead Marketplace, which I think ended up being the Fry's. So those things are called out. This was essentially one of the redevelopment plans that were updated, reaffirmed. Again, it's been updated again. Elan was here a few months ago for it's really north and east of the trail. But the TIF district was kind of created out of this, and the LLC ended up acquiring 100 acres. So now you have one person that controls a lot of real estate. Now you can make it downtown. So it had these same themes throughout: pedestrian-oriented, mixed use, high density, some market rate housing was all in part of that. This is the document that was Superstition Square that mentioned the realignment of Idaho Road, coming around the downtown, trying to create a town center, still having to deal with a 6-lane highway bisecting the town, Phelps Drive. Again, those same concepts of retail, entertainment, mixed use, work-live space, some open space. It really here shows really where Flatiron Park could be. This shows the, again, I guess some green space here, but the college was part of all that. This is kind of a plan view of that same thing, but it talks about kind of densities, intensities, same architects that were involved in the previous document. And again, it kind of shows perhaps what was intended to be open space and a Flatiron Park. Then the DRIZ, of course, what by G&G Consulting was to present a framework to really how do we go from this suburban type zone, what type of land uses were along this area where Safeway and all that is, the vacant land that we talk about every day, don't we, Bryant? This area next to...
for lots of reasons.
For lots of reasons. But and there's some floodplain in there, and that's been a hindrance too. The north side of the trail is floodplain. This transition zone as you come into the downtown, what the DRIZ envisioned as the downtown. So it really wanted to create a framework to have a vibrant downtown core that reflect our heritage. So then there were 161 tasks in the DRIZ. 81 were completed, which I think is phenomenal. And a lot of folks, a lot of effort were involved in that. But then earlier, the rug was pulled out. Remember we had the discussion about the rug. Many of these things didn't happen because there wasn't a funding mechanism to go forward. So they're not been done by not wanting to do them. The most recent one we saw, the decorative signs that went in last year. What year is this? So we had the new signs around downtown. Really all came out of this program. So we have had discussions ongoing about how can we take those other, 80 tasks and how do we, kickstart them. So some of them are still in play. But again, it shows really this was the physical plan piece of that. One of the things when a developer comes in and says, what do you want? At the roundabout, now we know what we don't want. But what do we want when someone comes in and says, I want to put single-family homes? I want to put 100 single-family homes. Is that what we want on the east side of there? The decisions that are made here are 80-year decisions, or 100. If someone builds a single-family subdivision that maybe could have been density, then those houses are going to be there for a long, long time. So decisions that are made with rezoning and all that, they have long-term consequences. So this was a map that was done that kind of built off some of these. You've seen some of this. There was some discussion about, I think, moving the Boys and Girls Club over here, taking advantage of this 15-acre site. This is the Nest property. This yellow property is all property, roughly what's owned by what was WGG Partners or still is. I think it's 15 or 20 acres. This is the Fry's site. This is what is affectionately known as the Orange Peel. I think that's the Orange Peel. The park, so here's a check off that the park was done. So this was, sorry for the direction here, but this was just another plan that ASU students did. Never went to council, never went anywhere, and maybe they saw that amphitheater idea in here and carried it forward. And the focal point was there. So skip through that. They had some ideas in there. So the general plan, not to correct you, Councilmember Barker, but this is what the general plan shows as downtown.
I was looking at the zoning map.
Yes, so the zoning map,
cuts
yes.
it off at the trail.
So what we try to do in working with Alon is say, okay, what would be the west? We didn't go as far west as the Driz went over to Meridian, but we stopped at it. So you really enter the downtown. You enter the city, of course, at Meridian, but you enter the downtown, and what can we do as a gateway to come into the downtown? Again, the new redevelopment plan goes further southeast, but it still encompasses what we would think was, in a 15-minute walk, where could you walk to? That's what we figured is what would be a boundary for downtown. So now we're going to get back to zoning. So Rudy helped me with this and what the original zoning was. It was CB2. It was really inherited from the county. So when this was the county, the maximum height you could build in this commercial zoning was 35 feet. You could go higher through a PD rezoning process. This would have been after 78, but we essentially primarily adopted the county code. So it took us a while to actually get the first code. I think it was 1985 after some discussions, and I don't know if there was a lawsuit involved, but we finally got a code. But by and large, it was a county code that then we tried to adapt over time to make it really for a city. The CB2 got split up into a C2 and a C3. So the maximum commercial height was 20 feet and then 30 feet. So those uses kind of were wide open. What you could do in a C2 and a C3 were wide open. The C3 zoning district it kind of concentrated the uses to be less intense. Building height was reduced from 35 to 20 feet and from 35 to 30 in the C3. And Rudy couldn't explain or remember why those heights were reduced down to 30 feet. Then it came, I think, as part of that 2006, 2007 era where the CCD zone was created that allowed a maximum height of 75 feet. And it could go higher with council approval after a Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation. So it greatly increased the height to 75 feet based on that Nielsen-Fackler plan. They envisioned something similar to 75 feet would generally be 7 or 8 stories, something like that, if you figure each floor plate's roughly 10 feet. So wanted maximum flexibility, allowed developers to come in and do some density. And then it also called, as part of that, a tourist attraction with an elevator constructed in the form of an old mining rig. So that's where Rudy...
mining rig in the drawing.
Rudy has the memory of the elephant, so he remembers everything.
Yeah.
So now that CCD has now become the B3. So it went from 75 down to 60. And that zoning map, I don't know if I have a zoning map here, but you could go higher through a PD rezoning process. So it kept, as Rudy says, many ideas of the CCD zone, but it tempered the building height, but still envisioning a flexible, dynamic downtown, taller buildings, as is fairly normal in a developing, urbanizing modern city. So then we get to uses. So Some of the uses that Councilmember Barker mentioned, like assisted living, is allowed in our downtown. Janine knows this. I've been wanting to do this for 5 years now, trying to get assisted living out of our zoning. It is going to happen. But some of these uses you would see more as highway commercial. And so our downtown zoning, even though it's B3, it allows a lot of uses by conditional use permit or outright. So having, semi-truck service, RV sales lots, some of those are all still permitted in the downtown. RV campgrounds would be by a conditional use permit. Contractor's office. So what normally people would see in a downtown, which would be more retail, office, housing, this has still a lot of uses, which I think we're going to bring back to trim down. Then, again, some of these uses already are allowed. Mini warehouses, retail kiosks, repair businesses, laundromats, crop production, Sam's Club, Costco, assisted living. Those are all uses that, and I don't know if we listed them all. I think in the attachment, we attach the current zoning regulations in the table that's in there in your packet, so you can see, you go to B3 and you can see the laundry list of pages and pages of uses that are allowed or by CUP or not allowed. So we do want to bring this back. So what we want to propose through the Plan Commission, this will all come back through the Plan Commission, through the council, is have some sort of, and consistent with the general plan that was just adopted, is that we would have some density in the downtown. I don't know if it's 4 stories or where that would be, but on the edge of the downtown, as you get towards Royal Palm and out on that eastern edge, you could start transitioning into some single-family homes, and then but Royal Palm is kind of the cutoff for downtown, and then you kind of enter into the Y, the rural area. So obviously, restaurants, bars, breweries, civic uses, parks, open space, which you already have, office space, mixed use is really the theme of a lot of downtown, colleges, universities, specialty retail, hotels, resorts. Those are really what you need to have. You need residential. You need office. Again, office is transitioning, as we know, but you can't just have single uses downtown. You have to have a mix of different government uses, hotels, restaurants, places to go to. So that is kind of the list that we would bring back in the future.
However,
75-foot
limit right now.
No, it's 60.
60 feet.
So that's
Okay.
really about a 6-story, maybe.
So you got three new council members sitting in the audience, and they'll be the ones with the remainder up here that'll be working on this. Let's say they lower it down to 35, but then somebody with a bunch of money looks at our downtown wide open. A future council can approve zoning in what, a matter of months? Hey, I want to come build a 6-story building down there again, and you're going to love it. This isn't set in absolute stone. I mean, this is all can be tweaked later on. So we're going to make it more usable, easy for people that are casually shopping. But like I said, if somebody really, really wanted to do a major product, they can always ask to change the zoning on a certain parcel.
If you have in the B3 district a zoning height limitation, then they would have to come in and do some amendment. And maybe that's through a PD where you say, I want a height amendment.
Right.
But I
So I'm
guess
just
what I
explaining to
recommend,
everybody
yes, it
that
could be.
You can get, council can approve zoning whenever.
Correct.
If somebody,
Yeah, I just think tonight was just making sure everybody knew a couple of land use issues, and then the height is there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
because-
if this council or future council was to go back or go to 35,
Right.
yeah, certainly you could rezone
Yeah.
it.
I think the important thing was, one of the things that I keep hearing is walkability. Well, you want to be able to have things to see and do as you're walking. Yes, there's a sidewalk. I walk there all the time, but there's not much there except auto repair and things like that, which are not the type of thing that I think enhance a walkable, entertaining, vibrant downtown. So again, this is the same as the affordable housing. I wanted to bring it up. I wanted to be sure that people knew about it, and they will do what they will do in the future. And perhaps councils will also learn to say no.
So where I was going with this, and that's all true and good, is that, remember that we've had really two plans for downtown. The latest one's a decade old. So the one before that was a decade before that. So a lot of stuff has been realized because there have been plans. The streetscaping, public art, Flatiron, Horizon, all those really as a result of thinking ahead, having a vision for downtown so that when a developer comes in, we as planners, we can say, no, the city's not interested in that because we can point to a document. So we don't necessarily have that, but a lot of things happened as a result of planning. The focal point, of course, Horizon Health and Wellness, a lot of the streetscaping that has been done are because there has been some forethought into what should downtown look like. What I think would help the community is drilling down further, having a community process. So it shouldn't be fought out at the zoning. It's too late at the zoning hearing to decide what kind of downtown you want. You have to decide early on, build on these efforts from the 90s through the 2000s, build on the DRIZ, and create a community vision for downtown that then we're not arguing about it, whether it's a 4-story building at the roundabout because we never thought that could happen. And luckily, maybe that didn't happen. So what does the city, what do we envision for the heart of the city? So we've had, again, a smattering of ideas, this idea that it should be walkable, it should have retail, commercial, housing, mixed use. We have a lot of strengths. It's still a relatively blank canvas. But in my opinion, there's still not a clear vision. That's why we're having a discussion. Should it be 75? Should it be 60? Should it be 35? I think the DRIZ efforts are running out of steam. I think we got as much mileage out of that document as we can over a decade and accomplished a heck of a lot. But to make things work, we have to have, there's still some blighting influences in the community downtown. We can all think of them. Doesn't take too long, but some poor connectivity, lack of infrastructure, lack of a mechanism. But again, we still have a relatively blank canvas with a lot of open space, but developers are coming to us all the time and say, hey, can I do the product that's over at Meridian and Superstition, this rental, single-family rental? They want to do that here. And I think it's an inappropriate use to put on the old hotel site. So we can resist that, but it's better if we have that in a document that we get community input and kind of take this to the next level. So I'll skip through some of these. So really, what does the city want for the heart? We just heard a presentation about 3,000 acres. We're talking about 300 here, or maybe 500. So can we come up with a vision for this community that the folks that live there want to come to? So we don't want them going south and southwest. We want them coming up here. So how do we get to a place? How do we build off everything we had? How do we create a town center that these folks want to come up and be part of the community? And so again, how do we convey to developers what we don't want? And then more importantly, for the community, what do we want as a community? That's what's important. So I know I drifted off the topic of, what are the permitted uses downtown? But I do think it's important because it is, in the new general plan, it really talks about the number one goal of the downtown of the 2020 plan is to develop a master plan for downtown. So just like we had the housing goals that we showed earlier, this is the number one goal in the recently adopted 3-to-1 vote by the community that we really should have a downtown master plan. I think there's so much to build on, but I do think the community has to come back and figure out. It would help us a lot to say no to the wrong type of development and say yes to everything that we want to happen.
Just out of curiosity, how the city complex building here, how tall is it? Just to get a visual, because we talk about 60 and 75 feet. It's like, what is this?
I would say, well, right now, this is over 20 feet just inside here. So it's got to be maybe 30, 35, just with the tower piece.
So the outside's like 30, 35?
35, 30, 35.
And a 3-story building at Horizon, again, I think is going to be 35, 40 feet.
Harley Davidson is tall.
Yep.
It's how tall is Harley Davidson?
I don't know off the top of my head, but they have pieces of it that are part of the architecture, that 2-story building essentially with mezzanine.
So when you talk about that to planning and zoning commissions or council, it might be a good idea to have that information for, because off the top of people's heads, they don't know what does 60 feet look like? What does 30, if we have some kind of an idea of what is here already, the heights, so that we can kind of get a.
So these are what I think are the next steps. I think the city does have to find the money to develop the next version of its downtown master plan, revise those B3 zoning districts to eliminate the unwanted uses, and we have guidelines. So we tell everybody what we'd like to see, but we don't have standards for what stuff really should look like. And then I think it's a golden opportunity. I know there's some interest with Mike Weaver and that 15 acres to develop some stormwater over there off this right across the road here, and I think that can be another basis for developers to overlook a 15-acre park. That could be stormwater, but a multi-use facility. So I think that was the last slide. So
I definitely think we need standards and not guidelines. Because how else are we going to decide what we want things to look like? We have to tell them, not be told what they want to do.
And this just happened with Filiberto. So if you drove by the week before last, Filiberto's was one color. And then staff went by there and said, ho, time out, that doesn't meet our palette that we have, but those are guidelines. And they said, okay, we're not done painting. Yes, we'll go look at your palette. So they looked at the palette of colors, and so it was going to be a much brighter thing that's kind of different than what we have. But again, those are guidelines, and they worked with us very well to go change it.
So that we don't have to do that? It should be part of the initial conversation. I mean, what colors are you thinking?
Right, and I think it is, and I think one of the things that happens, though, is that they are still guidelines even then. And that's one of the concerns is they're not standards. And so even though we probably had that discussion, they still went and did it, and then luckily.
Yeah, it was nice that they were willing to work.
Right.
Yep,
yeah.
Exactly. All right, I think that's it.
I'll just say this, thank you,
out.
Larry. This is huge and great topic every 10 years. I can't believe it's been 10 years since we did DRIZ. This is the type of topic that is really great for a new city council to discuss during a retreat. As you consider how many downtowns you get to have. Right? If you look at it that way, it's just one of those things that's so important. It's been a consistent thread for this city and city councils over a long time to focus in on efforts that a city government could do to help incentivize. So I'm done. Yeah.
Are we done? Okay. Presentation and discussion with City Manager Bryant Powell regarding programmatic support of regional homelessness.
Thank you, Your Honor. I wanted just to give everyone an update on some work that I've been doing with the East Valley city managers over the last couple years. You approved a resolution about a year and a half ago for me to continue that dialogue with Tempe, mostly, and Mesa, Chandler, as well as Apache Junction. And we've worked really closely on some topics, and we're getting to the point where they're wanting some feedback from us. And so this will be a very brief discussion and presentation, but we've been working on this. This is the ASU homeless study. We have countless number of hours in volunteers, community workers, our nonprofits, our religious groups working together to coordinate and correlate support for those who are not sheltered. So tonight's two questions that are being asked of us as we're working with other city councils potentially, and especially under the umbrella of MAG, is the city of Apache Junction willing to continue to have me be a part of those discussions? And my recommendation to you is to say yes, is to have me continue to be a part of that. I don't think we want to not learn from best practices that are happening and that are being worked on in that area. The second question is, if so, then how much participation are we willing? And this is just a discussion item. There isn't any answer, it has to be done. But I do want to share with you some things that you are doing already that I could bring back to the group that they're not aware of that help our regional effort. So, for example, in Apache Junction, we are able to work with our nonprofits. And when I showed the groups our coordinated effort that we have, meaning the city of Tempe and Mesa and others, they were surprised how coordinated that effort is. We also set aside in the general fund about $100,000, depending on the year, $80,000 in health and human services that go to these nonprofits. So what I would be saying to this group is, unless I hear something differently today, is that yes, you're okay with me continuing to work and work with and utilize some of my time and maybe even some of your time, because I think at some point they're going to want to get some elected official groups together. And that's what I keep hearing, is that there may be a form of one or two of you at some point going in with one or two of these other groups to talk about regional efforts. Don't know where that'll take us, don't know what that means exactly, but I think there are some innovative ways to work together. This is, when we think about homelessness and the underlying issues behind it, it does not matter a political boundary, does not matter the county boundary. I know some great work's being done out here in the county with ASU, and we're making some great progress. But I would, if you're okay, I will continue to be on those it's a quarterly meeting. And I will continue to bring up that we have the 100,000 or so towards Health and Human Services. I know that much you feel comfortable with, and then maybe at some point, if we get asked to go to a meeting, would you be comfortable to come with me on that, something like that? I don't know. I'd have to work with the mayor on that to find out who could go from the city council on that. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, thumbs up. And that's all I needed. I just wanted to update y'all on some of those efforts that are being done and talked about that you may hear from a city and Mesa council member or Tempe, especially those two cities, and Chandler are really struggling with some of these issues.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
In those groups, did they ever drive around at all?
Not yet.
They don't in the communities? Because some of those communities you named
Yeah.
are, it's surprising what you see.
Mm-hmm. It is a very touching situation, and there's lots of work that can be done, and there is philosophical amounts of what government should do and not do. But I think we are trying to figure out what we don't want to happen is what's happening right now in Orange County, where the cities and towns are suing their own county government because the county board of supervisors had established one of the places that they were going to focus the money to be for either services or shelter, and it's in Santa Ana. Well, Santa Ana, if you know the timing and you know anything about Orange County, that was the first city. That's the area that's the most maybe toughest area. And Santa Ana was the first one that said, hey, other cities and towns, let's now sue. What I think the Tempe city manager and the Tempe city council is trying to do is like, hey, let's make this more of a regional approach. We don't know where this will take us yet. We just know we don't want to be suing each other as cities.
It's complicated.
It's complex, yeah.
Okay.
That's it, yep.
All right. And we might want to make this next one a twofer.
Mm-hmm.
Discussion on resignation of Planning and Zoning Commissioner Shirley Uli. And we just received news today that there's going to be another P&Z opening. So let's plan for that now so that we can.
Yep, so this afternoon we received a letter of a resignation of another Planning and Zoning Commissioner. Could we turn this over to Jennifer a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about some of the options that council has, and then we'll let them go.
Sure. So last month in October, council interviewed and appointed several members to the various boards and commissions. Since then, we've received 2 letters of resignation from the Planning and Zoning Commission. So this item is on for tomorrow night for direction to staff, but we brought back those individuals that specifically applied for the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so you have a couple of options, because you had inquired if there's a recent vacancy on any of the border commissions, because we were still lacking a person for the Construction Board of Appeals, because we didn't have a qualified applicant for that. And you had asked if there was an applicant, could you interview and appoint someone quickly if there was a vacancy on another border commission, but you had interviewed that person already, could you just go ahead and appoint someone? So this is all up to you, how you want to proceed. In the staff memo that is before you, you have a couple of options, or you could totally come back with another decision on how you want to proceed. But we do have those individuals on a sheet to you tonight that did apply. If you would like, tomorrow night we're seeking direction how you want to move forward with the process. If you want us to reach out and contact them and see if they're still interested in serving on P&Z.
So we can only be direction to staff. We can't just fill it tomorrow.
It is,
Correct.
I believe, only on the agenda for direction to staff.
Right.
And I won't make the 24-hour. Excuse me?
Who else resigned?
Mike McGraw.
So we could direct staff to fill those positions with X and Y.
Is that possible?
That's direction to staff.
Yes.
I like that.
Well, I think,
Be done with it.
well, I'll tell you, it is written pretty, I did write that, and it's, and the process to fill the vacant position.
I just don't know how council would come to a vote.
Well, we have
On the
people who
decision?
expressed interest, and we interviewed all those people.
Yes.
You did.
So
If you want to do that, I would suggest that you direct staff to bring it back on a date certain to actually do the vote. Especially now that there's two. We don't really mention the other individual, so that's probably not legal if you were to appoint someone tomorrow night.
Both tomorrow. Well, we
Correct.
could possibly do one. We could direct staff to
I
bring one
think
on
you-
board.
I think it's a stretch, but I still think you should move it to another night,
Why?
because then you could do both and get it over with if you wanted to.
Well, and I would like to change the language and remove Shirley's name from it, and it basically would read to appoint to fulfill vacancies.
Maybe
On
there'll be more
PNC.
by 3 weeks from now.
We'll see
There
that.
might be.
Could be.
Are we going to allow people the opportunity to, we have the list of people that already showed interest. We're going to contact them, I would assume, and let them know that there may be another appointment.
Well, we just didn't want to
But-
assume tonight what you wanted to do. That was kind of
That's
what
your
tonight was,
direction.
yeah.
That's
So
your
can
direction,
we
staff.
still accept applications? There may be people watching this that were like, I missed the deadline. I
That's the
really
direction
was
to staff.
interested."
If you wanted us to reopen the application process, and if you wanted to interview anybody that was new as an applicant, so this is all how you want to proceed. We could reopen up for accepting applications, make it a week or two, and then come back at a future date to interview those newbies. It's all how you wish to proceed.
So we don't see what's coming down the road on P and Z. Like, we usually know what's coming with council. Is there anything really pressing coming up that they're going to need a full slate quicker?
Well, during what period of time? If you're talking for the next 6 months, yeah, there's a lot of planning items.
6 months, yeah, but I mean, by Christmas.
So
Not-
Larry,
no-
maybe you can help with that. I mean, what would it be like to be with 5 for a month? Or I'm not sure where you're going, Mayor, but
Yeah,
6
just-
a month.
Yeah, I think we're fine for the next 2 or 3 meetings. I think we'll be fine.
Okay.
So we don't have a lot coming up, but after that, it's going to be a lot. So right now, we don't have a lot of stuff in the pipeline right now.
So if we've already interviewed these people, we don't need to re-interview them, but if there's new applications, and we're going to allow new applications, I don't know if that's what the others want, we would definitely want to interview them, the new ones. I don't know if we're going to accept new ones or not. Does anybody have any thoughts, or are we just going to go for the pool here?
Well, that's what we're going to decide with direction to staff.
Right.
So can we get this all wrapped up by the first meeting in December? If we direct staff
If you could.
tomorrow?
I'm sorry, Brian.
Gives you 2
I was
weeks,
just going to
right?
say that
December
tomorrow, if
2nd.
that's what your direction is, so the 17th is a chance tomorrow night to say, you want to open it up for a couple weeks, do interviews maybe on November 30th, or just do interviews on the 1st and appoint on the December 1st. We have a council meeting possibly on the December 14th and 15th that are set aside before even the new year.
let's do it on the first one.
Sitting between you two, I can't stop laughing.
Okay, so I think we have a good idea. So in December, we can interview Monday and appoint Tuesday. Yes. Anyone else on this? I think we're about done.
So do it on the first meeting in December is what you're talking about?
So tomorrow night, this is on for direction to staff, and then just let us know if you'd like to open it up. We'll open it up for a period of time. Interviews then could be conducted on that Monday night work session with appointment and voting on Tuesday night.
That's pretty quick.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you'd have 2 weeks for people to apply, and then November 30th interview and December 1st appoint.
Okay. With that, we will be adjourned until tomorrow.